dadbodhistory.
Welcome back to Dad Bod History. It is just Jake tonight, and we are continuing our series on the labors of Hercules. Tonight we're going to talk about Hercules' fourth labor, the Erymanthian Boar. So let's dig in. But before we do that, I do want to just ask you, please like, subscribe, follow, hit that notification bell. If you do that, we appreciate it so much. And yeah, so that's it. Like, subscribe, follow. All right, let's get in. All right, so before we do that, let's do a quick recap of kind of where we are to Hercules' story up to this point. Remember, he's the son of Alcmene and Zeus, so he's half god, half mortal, a demigod. He was driven mad by Hera, killed his 3 children. After his madness, he went to the Oracle of Delphi, and he asked the Oracle, what do I do? Do I go into exile? Do I do something to atone for my sins, basically? And the Oracle told him, go serve for 10 years to Eurystheus and do anything that he asks you, and basically perform 10 labors in 10 years of service. The first labor that he has to do for Eurystheus is kill the Nemean lion. He did that. The second one, he had to kill the Lernaean Hydra. He did that one, but he had the help of his cousin Aeolus. And so that one actually didn't count towards his 10 labors. His third labor was he had to bring back the Cernian hind or the Cernian deer alive to Eurystheus. So those are the 3 labors he's performed thus far. Now we're going to get into the fourth labor, the Erymanthian Boar. And this one is similar to the Cernian hind. Eurystheus told Hercules he had to bring the boar back to him alive. So he didn't kill it. He couldn't kill this one. And if you remember with the Cernian hind, he had to chase it for over a year until it got exhausted, and then he had to throw it on his shoulders and carry it all the way back. And he was accosted by Artemis because it was like her favorite deer. So that whole thing. So it's kind of similar in that where he's got to track it, hunt it, but he cannot kill it. He has to bring it back. However, the difference between the Cernian hind and the Erymanthian boar is that the Cernian hind is a peaceful animal. I mean, it runs and will kind of put to flight, but it doesn't cause destruction. It doesn't cause harm to the livestock or the people, which is why Artemis liked it so much. She said, leave the deer, don't kill the deer. The Erymanthian boar is not that type of animal. It is destructive. It is causing problems. And so let's start. Fourth labor, Erymanthian boar. The fourth labor Eurystheus commanded Hercules to perform was to bring the Erymanthian boar alive. This beast was causing destruction in the Sophis by making attacks from a mountain they call Erymanthos, hence the name Erymanthian Boar. So Sophis is located in northwest Arcadia. And if you remember what we talked about previously, there's the Peloponnese, which is this peninsula. And within the Peloponnese is Attica, Athens, Corinth, which is the isthmus connecting one part of the Peloponnese to the other. Sparta is there. Thebes is north of Athens. Marathon is on the Peloponnese. So all these kind of like blue chip city-states are on the Peloponnese. And Sophis, and that's spelled P-S-O, not S, is northwest Arcadia on the Peloponnese. And remember, he has to bring the boar back alive to Eurystheus. All right. So, as he starts his story, and this one's a little different because the other 3 stories, he kind of set out, found the animal, did the task. Set out, found the animal, did the task. It may have taken him a good long while to accomplish that task, but he did. It was from point A to point B pretty linearly. This one is not so much, and we'll see why. On his way to find the boar, Hercules stays as a guest with a centaur called Pholos. Now, if you don't know what a centaur is, which most people do, we see them in a lot of retellings of these myths and in other high fantasy and culture. A centaur is a creature that has the body of a horse, but the trunk and head of a man. And depending on the depiction of it, originally all four, or the back legs were a horse's legs, and the front legs were a man's legs. And so the back half was horse, and then it was a man in the front, or woman in the front, and then obviously a man or woman's body and head. And then eventually that kind of changed to where all 4 feet were horses' feet and all 4 legs were horses' legs. So there's 2 images of centaurs, but that's kind of an aside. It's not germane necessarily to what we're talking about here. But they did descend from the union of a man, King Ixion of the Lapiths, and a nymph who is named Nephele. And at the time, Nephele and Ixion, Nephele was in the shape of a horse, I believe, is the story. And so their offspring were half horse, half man. And that's where the centaurs come from. So I'm going to read the first paragraph, or the first part of this section. So traveling through Pholo, Hercules stayed as a guest with the centaur Pholos, the son of Silenos and an ash tree nymph. This centaur offered Hercules meat that was roasted, but he himself ate his raw. So Pholos did not cook his meat, and he did cook the food for Hercules, but he ate the meat himself raw. When Hercules asked for wine, Pholos said that he was afraid to open the centaur's communal storage jar. Hercules told him not to worry and opened the jar. Okay, so that's the first section. Let's kind of break into this. First thing is, there's this rule of hospitality, and it transcends Greek culture. The Celts were known for their hospitality. The Romans did as well. Zeus was actually the god of hospitality. And it was a sacred rite in many ancient cultures. Hosts, specifically in Greece, were to offer food, rest, and safe transport to wherever the guest was going. Guests were in turn not to be a threat or a burden to the host. And this was called Xenia. Okay, and so Zeus was actually the god of Xenia, the god of hospitality. And so there's these rules that hosts have to follow, and there's rules that the guests have to follow. Pholos was being a good host. He offered him wine. He offered him a place to stay. And had it got to that point, he would have offered him safe passage to where he was going. Hercules kind of breaks one of the rules, though. Remember, the guests cannot be a threat and they cannot be a burden to their hosts. But Hercules demands wine, and he demands the communal wine. So not just Pholos' wine, but all the centaurs' wine. And this causes a problem in the next section. But he kind of breaks that rule of Xenia, and this causes some issues, and you'll see just what happens next. So Hercules, remember, he told him not to worry, and he opened the jar. Not much later, the centaurs scented the door and came around with rocks and fir trees to Pholos' cave. Hercules repelled Anchios and Agrios, the first, to grow bold enough to enter by hitting them with burning firewood. And he shot the rest with his bow, pursuing them all the way to Malea. From there, they fled to the home of Chiron. And we'll get to who Chiron is in just a second. But what happens next? Okay, so the centaurs can smell that Hercules has opened the communal wine. And so they go to confront him about it, basically saying, you broke the rules of hospitality. And they come at him. But notice what weapons they come at him with rocks and trees. So they're strong, right? They're swinging trees, but they're primitive. They're primitive weapons. They're not known for their sophistication. They're not known for their ability to make tools. They're largely primitive creatures, even though they have the mind of a man. Obviously, it's not developed in the way that we would think. So what happens is Hercules, he kills the first two, Anchios and Agrios, and then he chased the rest, shooting them with his arrows. And he chases them to a specific centaur named Chiron. And Chiron is probably the most famous of the centaurs, and we'll get to who he is in just a moment. So let me read the next section here. So they flee to the home of Chiron, who had settled at Malea after being driven from Mount Pelion by the Lapiths. Hercules shot an arrow from his bow at the centaurs who had surrounded Chiron. The arrow went through Aletos's arm and lodged into Chiron's knee. Distressed by this, Hercules ran up, pulled out the arrow, and applied a drug that Chiron gave him. Chiron, with his wound unable to be cured, left to return to his cave. He wanted to die there, but he was unable to do so because he was immortal. Prometheus offered himself to Zeus to become immortal in Chiron's place, and that is how Chiron died. So there's a lot there. So let's unpack that. Who was Chiron? Well, in other stories, we realize that Chiron, he's called the most noble and wise of the centaurs. So whereas the other centaurs are primitive, sticks and rocks and uncooked meat and stuff like that, Chiron is far more sophisticated. He's wise. He's beloved by all. He was a teacher. He was the son of Kronos, who's actually Zeus's father, and another nymph named Philyra. Why wouldn't his wound heal, though? So remember, it said the arrow went through Aletos's arm and lodged into Chiron's knee, and it said the wound would not heal. Well, remember, when we talk about the Lernaean Hydra, what did Hercules do after he killed the Hydra? He cut open its stomach, and he dipped his arrows in the stomach bile, in the acid or the poison of the Hydra. So he had poison-tipped arrows. And so that's why it didn't matter what Hercules did. It didn't matter what medicine Chiron told him to put on. That wound was not going to heal. And Chiron, because he was the son of Kronos, who is Zeus's father, Chiron is immortal. He can't die. So now he has this wound that won't heal, and he has to live with that pain in perpetuity. And what's the solution? Hercules is distressed. Hercules loves Chiron and feels terrible about what he did. So Prometheus, and I'm sure you've heard of who Prometheus is. He's the god that gave man the ability to make fire. He taught them fire, and for that he was punished. And basically, Prometheus offers to take Chiron's place. So he's going to take Chiron's immortality upon himself so that Chiron can die. Others say Chiron offered his immortality to free Prometheus. So there's different accounts. One says Prometheus offered to take his immortality so Chiron could die. Others say Chiron offered his immortality to Prometheus to free him. Remember, Prometheus was punished for giving the fire to humans, and his punishment was particularly brutal. He was chained to a rock, and each morning an eagle would come, and the eagle is kind of the avatar of Zeus, would come and peck out Prometheus's liver, and each day or each night his wound would heal, and each morning the eagle would come again, peck out his liver, and he would heal. So that's who Prometheus was. So some say Chiron offered his immortality to Zeus to free Prometheus. Others say he offered his immortality to Hercules, because at this time we don't know if Hercules is immortal. The Oracle of Delphi says if you complete the tasks, you will become immortal and live forever on Olympus. But we don't know if that's actually true yet. So some say Chiron offers his immortality to Hercules, who in turn frees Prometheus. And something I noticed here when I was reading this, and I think there's a modern application to it, is that Chiron has this pain and it won't go away. And he's going to live with this chronic pain forever. And he wants a way out. And the way out in this case is either Prometheus offers to take his place or he offers to give up his immortality to help Prometheus or Hercules so that he can die on his own terms. And I think there's an application there, and I'm not going to get too much into the social effects of it, but a lot of debate today is dying with dignity, people with chronic pain or terminal disease wanting to choose their death and choose the terms of their death. And I think there's an illusion here between Chiron and modern day medical thought or sociological thought on who says when a person can or cannot die. Is it truly left up to God alone, or in the case of ancient Greece, the gods? Or does a person have agency, or in the case of ancient Greece, does Chiron have agency? And so I think there's a question there. I'm not going to delve into what I think the answer is, but it is certainly something that stuck out to me. All right, so let's move on. So Chiron does die. He is allowed to give up his immortality, and he's allowed to die, so he doesn't have to suffer with this wound. So the next little section. After Chiron dies, the rest of the Centaurs fled, each to a different place, some to Cape Malea. Eurytion went to Pholo, so back to Pholo, and Nessos went to the river Euanos. Poseidon took in the rest to Euloisis and concealed them with a mountain. So Poseidon, god of the sea, hid them. As for Pholos, he pulled, remember Pholos, the one at the beginning who offered Hercules a place to stay and food and the wine, pulled an arrow out of a corpse, and he marveled that a small thing could kill such large foes. The arrow slipped from his hand and fell onto his foot, killing him instantly. So, what happens there? The rest of the Centaurs flee to various places. Poseidon hides most of them. But Pholos, the first Centaur, looks at the arrow and he's like, wow, that's amazing. How could just a little arrow kill a mighty Centaur? And as he was doing that, he dropped it and it falls on his foot. And he dies instantly. And it's so Greek. It's so typical of things that you see in these Greek stories, these ironies of ironies that happen in the telling. And it's not like there's some big lesson here. It's just these ironies and these poetic tragedies that happen to the characters as things are happening. And the only thing I could draw from that is Pholos died as a result of his hospitality. And again, I don't think that's a lesson on don't be hospitable or don't be neighborly, but it is just interesting, right? Had Pholos not offered his hospitality to Hercules, none of these other bad things would have happened. None of these other tragedies would have taken place. But remember, the labor isn't about go kill a bunch of centaurs. Eurystheus didn't send Hercules to go kill a bunch of centaurs. What did he send them to do? He sent him to capture the Erymanthian Boar. So this whole thing that happens up until this point where Pholos dies is kind of a side quest. It's kind of this whole diversion. It's this whole other story that happens within the main story. So let's get back to the main story. When Hercules returned to Pholo and saw that Pholos was dead, he buried him and went to hunt the boar. He chased it from a thicket by shouting, and when it was tired out, he forced it into a deep snow, lassoed it, and brought it to Mycenae. That's the end of the story. So this whole story spends all this time talking about these centaurs and Chiron and Pholos and hospitality and like all this other stuff is happening. And then when it gets to the actual story of capturing the boar, it's like, oh yeah, no, he chased it, yelled at it, scared it out of a thicket, put a lasso around it, and took it back to Mycenae. That's it. That's the end of the story. Like it's just always comical how we spend all this time talking about this other thing, and they're like, oh yeah, let's wrap up the whole point of the story. And so that's a relatively like benign ending to the story. But there are some similarities between the Erymanthian boar and the Cernian hind. Remember, the Cernian hind, Hercules chased it for a year until it was exhausted, and then he threw a trap of some sort, be it that he shot it with a sling or a net or an arrow, or that it just passed out from exhaustion. That's how he caught the Cernian hind. Similarly, with the boar, you see he chased it from a thicket by shouting, and when it was tired, so again, like the Cernian hind, he wore it out. It doesn't say that it took him a year. He forced it into a deep snow, lassoed it, and then brought it to Mycenae. And that's it. And that's the end of that story. But it counts. Remember, we've got the first labor that didn't count was the Lernaean Hydra because he had help from Iolaus. So in this case, he didn't have any help. He brings it back alive. He meets the demands of Eurystheus. And so another one of his 10 labors is completed. So that wraps up the story of the Erymanthian boar. If you guys have any questions about it, feel free to reach out. You can comment on the video or send a message to me at Jacob Ryans on Instagram, or History by Jake, or Jacob Ryans 16 on Twitter. And I'll be happy to answer those questions. Or if you have any suggestions, feel free to reach out about those as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.